Hello and welcome to episode 68 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And Mike, today is going to be the last day I think we ever say the name Yamamoto on this podcast. Probably not, but the big pitcher has signed. He has signed the largest contract in MLB history for a pitcher, and it is not with the New York Mets. It is with the Los Angeles Dodgers, who seem to have endless money and spend $1 billion on two players. Obviously, the deal's 12 years, $325 million for somebody who hasn't thrown a pitch in the majors yet. We're going to dive into this between the Mets perspective and a lot of other things, but I just want to get your initial reactions here with the Yamamoto sweepstakes coming to a close here and him heading out west.
Yeah, the immediate reaction for me or for most Mets fans is of disappointment, right? Like, this was the marquee guy on the board, and the Mets obviously wanted him. They flew to Japan. They had him for dinner at the Coens. They made him a substantial offer. This is what the Mets were honed in on this entire offseason. They've signed some depth pieces to this point, but this is what they were really honed in on, was getting Yamamoto, because he's an ace and he's 25, and that type of player doesn't come on the market ever. And that's why he got a record deal, right? Is because that's just a combination that doesn't happen from a pitching standpoint. And look, I know the Mets, obviously, they offered the same as the Dodgers. Right. He decided to go to LA. I know someone tweeted it out today. Can't remember who it was, but someone tweeted, if you have the same offer between New York and LA, a fair majority of those people are probably going to take LA. Sure, and especially in this case, when you're talking about what the Dodgers have done recently, right, compared to what the Mets have done. That certainly plays into it. They just signed the best player on the planet and added him to a 100-win team. So it's not just, some people say that maybe he wanted to go to the Dodgers anyway. Well, yeah, why wouldn't he want to go to the Dodgers? Look at the there's a reason why Steve Cohen said he wanted to be the East Coast Dodgers, because of how much winning they've been doing, the payroll that they have, the infrastructure that they have. It's a great organization to go to. As far as that goes, like we said, the Mets made the initial offer, and then the Dodgers matched it. It sounds like the Mets didn't get like another chance to up the offer or anything like that, which is fine. That's somewhat typical sometimes. Like, you don't always get a chance to up the offer, and I'm sure what we don't know about that is it's probably their agent was probably pretty clear about how this was going to go. Sure. And the fact that you are going to get a chance, you might just get one chance at an offer. Not every negotiation is the same, and not every time do teams get multiple chances at putting in a bid. With that said, and with what the Dodgers agreed to and what the Mets offered, and in talking to some people in baseball, they think, and I agree a little bit, I think that the Mets misjudged the market just a little bit. I think there was an expectation that they also knew that they might have to outbid the Dodgers a little bit to get Yamamoto. And with that in mind, and with the people I talked to, they thought that the Mets probably were going to go a little bit higher. They thought they were going to hit the 350 or hit the 325, but with 10 years. Sure. There's different ways that you could have done it, and there's different opt-outs. Like, Yamamoto did get 2 opt-outs. We didn't hear about how that played into the Mets offer. So it was the same offer and money in years, but we're not sure if it was the same, if it had the same opt-outs too, the same structure. We haven't seen the complete structure. We heard that it's backloaded, but we haven't seen that yet, and we don't know how the Mets offer was. So I do think, and I was a little surprised once I saw what he signed for and what had been out there on the public realm once it was for 12 years. I was a little shocked that the Mets didn't offer a little bit more. I know that's a record. The overall number is a record. but it is over 12 years. He's 25 years old. Of course, there is a posting fee on top of it. The Dodgers are paying almost $51 million on top. But yeah, I think you have to say in the long run that the Mets, for the most part, did what they could here. Like I said, they went to Japan. They had dinner with the Coens. They obviously put out a very good offer. I just, given what it meant to the offseason, and not just this offseason, but 11 more off seasons, right? I was just a little surprised that they didn't go a little bit higher. But again, 325 million isn't anything to sneeze at.
Yeah.
So it's tough to. I guess we're kind of picking at hairs here,
Sure.
and mostly because of what Yamamoto is. Like we're talking about, like the unicorn he is for this type of free agency, and kind of so what's after him. So I know we'll get into that more, but I think that plays into how I felt the Mets should have been a little bit more aggressive with their offer, is that the next two guys are Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery, who the Mets have apparently put out there that they aren't interested in pivoting to either of those guys. And I mean, we'll argue the merits of that, I'm sure, later in the show. But again, so if you're not going to sign Yamamoto and then you're not going to sign any of the next tier guys, then you're dropping down an entire tier. And we're talking about Lucas Giolito and Marcus Stroman and Michael Lorenzen, like those types. For me, that again would push me to be a little more aggressive in the offer. But like I said, all in all, the Mets did a lot here. They were aggressive overall in trying to get Yamamoto, and ultimately the Dodgers matched the offer. And let's say the Mets go to 350, maybe the Dodgers match that too.
Right.
It's very possible. We've seen that they're willing to spend. So maybe the Mets do go to 350 and the Dodgers match. So there's a lot to we could discuss this overall. I mean, for probably a couple of hours and just go through it. But I'll let you take the floor because I know you have some thoughts too.
Yeah, listen, it's disappointing because of like what we talked about, just how it seemed like this was such a huge get for the Mets, and really this is the hardest I think it feels like for me push for a free agent in a long time. It feels like, and openly too. So it is disappointing, but to your point, they made a substantial offer, $325 million over 12 years, for someone who's, and I keep going back to it. And obviously these teams must obviously see something in him for multiple teams like this to throw this kind of money. But when you start getting up to that, he hasn't thrown a pitch in the major leagues yet. And for me, when you hear, and time will tell, right, what actually happened. We'll find out as the years go on here. But if it's true that the Mets made that offer and then he went to the Dodgers and had them and they matched it and the Mets didn't get a chance to re-up, to me, that kind of says that he really probably didn't want to be here to begin with, probably was using leverage, which I'm not holding against him. That's what you do when you negotiate. But it just kind of felt like ultimately, he wanted to end up being a Dodger and was using leverage to get more money. And, I don't know if I blame the Mets for not going to $350 million and then with another $50 million posting fee. And now you're talking $400 million for a pitcher who's never thrown a pitch in the majors yet. And again, we know there's no salary cap. The CBT is a different thing. We know Cohen has all this money, but I would imagine at some point the Mets probably looked at themselves and said, again, this is a 2-year plan, but you have Alonso, other guys you want to try and, pay it to. At some point, I think for the unknown of he hasn't pitched in the majors yet, I think they made the right choice in not trying to outbid for themselves or anybody else. And, to a point when you give a contract like that and a player says no, I don't know if you necessarily maybe would have wanted them anyway, because maybe they wouldn't have been a fit. It's obviously disappointing, but Met fans are acting like the sky was falling and people are saying that, blaming the Mets and this and that. Mets did everything they could. I think we're in agreement there. They really did everything they possibly could. Went to Japan, had him at his house. I mean, they wooed him as much as they possibly could and made a more than fair offer. It just came down to his preference.
Well, and I disagree a little bit. I actually think from the Mets fans that I've talked to, they're actually pretty on
Okay.
board. They're then pretty on board with kind of what you're saying is that
Sure.
they made a really good offer. He decided to go to the Dodgers. And I think, and yeah, I don't have a huge issue with that thought process. And I just think that leverage, I mean, I think that gets misconstrued a little bit because there's every free agent is trying to create leverage.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that eventually if the Mets had a type of offer that he preferred, that he wouldn't go to New York. And just because someone chooses somewhere else doesn't mean they didn't want to go to New York either.
Right.
Like Mike Hampton decided to go to Colorado because of the school systems. People didn't hold that against them. John Olerud wanted to go, him and his wife wanted to live in Seattle.
Right.
And that's just the way it was. Like there's players have certain reasons why they want to go to certain places. And a lot of times it's also because they have a similar, in this case, the exact offer. And so, yeah, I mean, like I said, we can talk about it a bunch, but I do think that most fans have been level-headed to the point of understanding like that the Mets made a good offer and that this is going to happen sometimes. Like LA is a big draw. And I think maybe that's the thing that hasn't been talked about enough is the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, LA is a great organization. They just signed Ohtani. They have Mookie Betts. They have Freddie Freeman. I mean, look, we obviously cover the Mets. We like Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Kodai Senga, these guys. They aren't Mookie Betts. They aren't Freddie Freeman. They aren't Shohei Ohtani. They just aren't that. And it's tough to compete with that sometimes. Like you said, put a bow on it, that the Mets, they courted him to the best of their ability. I know Will Salmon wrote a good article in The Athletic today kind of talking about it and how maybe this didn't work with Yamamoto, but the approach that they took could certainly be successful in the future because you're going to strike out on free agents. And next offseason, there's going to be some big free agents again. Juan Soto is going to be out there. Zach Wheeler's going to be out there.
And probably Pete Alonso.
Pete Alonso is a guy they're going to have to court next offseason.
Yep.
So it's a process. They did it the right way for the most part, like I said, and we'll see if it benefits in the end. And I think now that it's done, I think the really interesting part, which I know we were going to get into next, is what do they do next?
Right. How do they pivot?
I kind of already said that Martino, Joel Sherman, someone else, a lot of people have alluded to the fact that they're not going to go after the Blake Snell. They're not going to go after Jordan Montgomery. And again, from the most part of at least what you see on Twitter, because that's where I do most of my conversing with Mets fans, is they were actually on board with this. And this is where I kind of disagree quite a bit because and I know there's warts with Blake Snell. There is with Jordan Montgomery. They're significantly older than Yamamoto.
Sure.
But they're also pretty typical age of a pitcher that hits free agency.
Right.
So this is the age of guys that you're going to have to give 5 or 6 year deals.
Sure.
That's just how free agency goes. I know Blake Snell has the qualifying offer attached, so that comes too. But
right.
I also think, and I don't think it's just Mets fans, I think it might be baseball fans in general, have kind of underrated Blake Snell. And part of that's because they see the big walks, which obviously are an issue.
That's my problem.
Some of the stuff that you see, like when he's playing, but I think that's more competitive than anything else. It's more like a Jeff McNeil type competitive thing. But this guy still won 2 Cy Youngs. He's got a 3.2 career ERA. He's got a fair amount of playoff experience and been pretty good in the playoffs.
Sure.
This is a guy that you would want. Of course, it matters how much. And I do think, obviously, you play in the draft, the qualifying offer, the fact that you would lose draft picks and $1 million in the national pool. But at the end of the day, the Mets need pitching. And like I wrote an article today, right now their starting rotation is Senga, Quintana, Houser, Severino, and then pick one of all the other guys.
Sure.
That's right now. Next offseason, their starting rotation is Kodai Senga.
Right.
The rest, Houser, Severino, and Quintana are all going to be free agents after this year. So if you're not pivoting to Montgomery or Schnell, you're pivoting to the next tier,
Sure.
which are guys that are typically getting shorter term deals.
Right.
Well, you have to have, you don't want to be in the same boat next year. Look, they gave Severino a 1 year deal. Houser is on his last year.
Yep.
And that's fine because they're like 5th, 6th starters depth. But at some point, you have to sign starting pitchers that are going to be here in 2024, 2025, hopefully maybe 2026, 27. Like you have to start building a rotation at some point. You can't sign Michael Lorenzen to a 1 year deal or Hyunjin Ryu to a 1 year deal. Like that can't be how you fix the offseason, because then guess where you are next year? You need 4 starting pitchers next offseason again. And I know it's a strong pitching market, but also you're going to get into this competition again where other teams, the Yankees, are going to want a big starter again, likely. The Giants could want a big starter. The Red Sox. I mean, there's going to be teams in the market for these. So to get back to my long-winded thing there, I think that the Nets should certainly be serious about being in the Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery market. Maybe it's on a different term than what they're looking for. The free agents are looking for. Maybe the Mets try to get creative with a shorter deal with the higher AAV. And that's fine. That mitigates some of the risk that you have long term. But the reality is that Blake Snell is a really good pitcher. Jordan Montgomery is a pretty darn good pitcher too. I mean, Snell's an ace.
Right.
Montgomery's a 2 or a 3. The Mets have Senga, who's an ace, and then they have a bunch of
back end guys.
Quintana's maybe a 3, 4, and then the rest of the guys are 5s and 6s. So I just don't think you can continue to add 3s. I mean, Lucas Giolito's maybe a 3, maybe a 4. So I just think that you have to get more quality, and whether you have to overpay a little bit to do that, I think the Mets are in the position where they have to do that now.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm in the camp with Snell. His walks do worry me a lot. So I would be weary to overpay there. Montgomery, I'd be more apt to maybe give a little more, only because I know he can pitch in New York. We've seen him do it with the Yankees. He's had a lot of success since he left to that. He had a great postseason. I don't love paying a guy after a huge workload after, a long postseason too, but like you said, the Mets don't really have a lot of options. So, either of those two guys, I would assume they're going to have to pivot no matter what. They could say what they want to. I'm sure they're going to be calling on both of them. And then, we tweeted out earlier today, just as far as folks giving us kind of some questions, things maybe they wanted to see for the show. And I want to throw 2 names out there that a couple of times got tweeted out. And again, this is just folks being curious. It depends on, there's probably for one of these guys, a lot's got to happen. I don't know what the deal is, but one name that came up here a couple of times was Trevor Bauer. Now, again, I don't know his deal with being reinstated with the MLB. I know he won his civil suits or whatever that was. The Mets would, especially with their history the last few years, and in general, they would have to do a whole lot of vetting. But I wonder, he pitched well last year in Japan. He's still I believe he's still relatively youngish as far as like early 30s. I believe he might be late 20, early 30s. I'm not exactly sure the age. His fastball velocity seemed to be up when he was pitching there last year. Again, it would have to be one of those things where everything comes back completely squeaky clean and there's going to be no issues and you're getting pennies on the dollar for someone like that. But it is interesting now because the Mets are going to have to pivot and they're going to have to find someone. I would just wonder someone like him. And then another name that sounds interesting as well is
let's focus on him so that we can get it over real quick. No. The Mets are not going to go after Trevor Bauer. It's not going to happen. It shouldn't happen. I know, like you said, it did come up. For some reason, Yankees and Mets fans both decided to bring him up on Twitter a lot today. Look, we just mentioned two guys are really good pitchers.
Yep.
Lucas Giolito, Michael Lorenzen, Marcus Stroman,
Sure.
Hyun-Jin Ryu. I mean, there's other guys that I'm forgetting. Yariel Rodriguez, which is the next guy.
That was the other name I wanted that was brought up a couple of times as well. I was wondering what you think about that kind of name.
Yeah, and I'll just finish on Bauer. Teams aren't going to touch him. I know John Heyman's John Heyman's going to try to he keeps trying to put his name out there that his agents are trying to. The guy hasn't pitched in the big leagues in 2 years.
Right.
There's a lot of hoops that would have to go through just for him to sign,
I guess. Yeah.
And it's just it's not even worth the baggage that comes with it.
Sure.
And I don't think that Stearns would care for it anyway.
But before you get to Rodriguez, though, I do want to. You mentioned Marcus Stroman. Do you think there's a world he would ever come back to the Mets after the way he left?
I don't think so. I just mentioned his name in general because when I think of starting pitching,
that next tier of pitchers.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't mention him because I think he would come back to the Mets because I don't think that would happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, the way my brain works is I just think of the tier of pitchers. Look on MLB trade rumors, which we've talked about, and go down the line and look at the ratings. And yeah, which is weird because like if you take his name away,
right,
he fits like a glove, right? Like he's exactly the type of pitcher that the Mets need right now.
Yeah, I know. They
need someone they can think of like quality innings, 175 big league innings, 3.75 ERA. Like that would be golden for the Mets right now to slide in at like their 4 spot. And but yeah, no, I don't. I think I think there's kind of a reason why Marcus Stroman, you haven't heard a ton about his market, right? Like there's concerns of other things besides the field. And let's move to Yariel Rodriguez, who I think you were going to mention and a bunch of people have talked about. I know kind of initially when he started doing workouts in the Dominican Republic, the Mets are one of the teams that scouted him.
Okay.
He was a reliever in Japan. He started in the WBC. He's still pretty young. I believe he's 26. So this is definitely a guy that's what intrigues a lot of people. Got a pretty good fastball, pretty good slider. Both of them are high spin pitches. Obviously, that intrigues teams nowadays. There is some question of whether he has maybe that third pitch or even if he has that stamina to be a starting pitcher in the big leagues. So I think it'll really depend on the team and kind of see how they see him. I think some teams might see him as a starter, and that will likely where he ends up because this is his first major league contract. So if someone sees him as a starter, they're obviously going to offer him more money. I haven't heard a ton of buzz around the Mets lately on him. Okay. But again, things like I know people I talked to today, the Mets were super laser focused on Yamamoto and for good reason. Like we're talking. Once that happened, and I think the Mets are certainly happy that it happened now instead of waiting till like January 3rd, right before the deadline. They're happy it happened now so that they can focus on Yariel Rodriguez.
Sure.
The other pitchers. And I mean, we've been on the show for like 24 minutes and we've only talked pitching, and the Mets still have a ton of non-pitching holes that we haven't even had a chance to talk about yet.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, I still think if I was the Mets, I would sign likely of those two. I would try because there's going to be other teams that are involved. I'm sure the Yankees will get involved with Montgomery. That makes a ton of sense. The Rangers have said to want him back too. So of the two, I think I would go for Montgomery. And like I said, I would go for the shorter deal with the higher AAV.
Agreed.
And go with that route. And that wouldn't be where I finished with the starting pitching. I would still get like one of the guys we mentioned, like a Michael Lorenzen, Ryu, one of those type of guys. And because the Mets just need pitching.
Right.
And Severino and Houser are good depth pieces, but they aren't enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll take next week to talk about the position players and the relief pitching. They also have to get, like you said, there's a million holes. But real quick, Mike, I do want you to just kind of give us a little bit about the two players the Mets acquired via trade here from the Brewers the other day. Obviously, you mentioned Houser a bit, who's a starting pitcher, 1 year left on his deal, back end starter. And then Taylor, they got, it seems like they got that fourth outfield spot kind of taken care of now with him. Speed plus glove, a little bit of pop there with some control. So just want you to give us a little bit about these couple guys here.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to give the trade a grade, I would give it an A. Look, they got Houser, who's a Trevor Williams type. Like, that could be the role that he plays, or he could start. He was a pretty good starter for the Brewers last year. He's made at least 21 starts the last 3 years, and he's got an ERA around 4 during that time. I mean, that on the free agent market cost you a lot more than the $5.6 million that he's looking for this year, or that he's going to likely get through arbitration. So you got a fifth starter type for pennies on the dollar, essentially, because the Brewers, and I find this a lot of irony in all of this, that Stearns' his first trade was with his former team,
Right.
He did it because he knew the Brewers were looking to shed salary.
Cash. Yep.
But yeah, so I think Houser's, it's a perfect piece for depth. Cool. And then Taylor, yeah, I mean, again, they were talking about signing a guy like Michael Taylor,
right,
who is going to get a multi-year deal at probably $7 to $8 million a year. Sure. And you have Taylor, his first year of arbitration, I believe, is estimated to make 1.7.
Gotcha.
So not only is this Tyrone cheaper, I think you can argue he's a better player too. Sure. And you can argue that he's a better fit for the Mets because I think his offensive upside is a little bit better. He had an isolated slugging over 200 last year. It would have been fifth on the Mets team behind Alvarez, Lindor, Stewart, Alonso, those guys. Gotcha. So he obviously has some pop. And like you said, he's a pretty good defender in all three spots, has a great arm, and his sprint speed is actually the best on the Mets roster now. Wow. So he has some speed too. This is a good fourth outfielder.
Sure.
And the Mets gave up Coleman Crow, who they just acquired earlier this year for Eduardo Escobar.
Okay.
And then after they acquired him, he never threw a pitch in the Mets system.
Right.
Had Tommy John, went unprotected in the Rule 5, and didn't get taken in the Rule 5. So that kind of gives you an idea of the value that Crow has. My list, when I was making my prospect list right now, he was going to be in the 30s range. So the Mets essentially gave up a 30 to 35 prospect in their system and got a fifth starter and a fourth outfielder.
Right.
And Taylor, the fourth outfielder, has 3 years of control.
Right.
So
exactly.
I would find it tough to find any issue with this trade. And I think it filled 2 holes for the Mets at a very low cost. And I was honestly surprised that was all they gave up. So
yeah,
I think that was a great deal for the Mets.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of those trades why you know why the Mets were clamoring after Stearns for a couple of years, right? It's trades like that, smart trades, building out, saving money in other ways that they can now spend, as kind of these starting pitchers like we were talking about. So, hopefully both of these guys work out for them. But obviously, like you said, right now it looks like an A trade. But want to wrap the show up, we'll talk hitters a little bit, but mainly the one particular that we've mentioned before now, especially with the Mauricio injury, I should say. Justin Turner, obviously it got and talked about the other day that they have had like initial discussions. They're both on each other's radars. Obviously, we both are in agreement now, especially with the Mauricio injury once again. That is a sign the Mets really should make, not only for for the DH role, but also just in general to push Beatty, now a veteran there. And, obviously Turner's not the best defender anymore at what is 37, 38 at his age, but we know he's a professional hitter and would provide kind of that thump that they would need. So just wanted to, wrap the show up on that, get your thoughts real quick.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, we've talked about it kind of every episode leading up to this, that we thought it was a great fit for the Mets before the Mauricio injury. And now it just feels natural. And I think one thing we haven't kind of talked about is just not only how we can help Beatty kind of push Beatty, how we can be depth behind Beatty if
Sure.
Beatty doesn't play the way the Mets expect, but I also think he can help Beatty a lot just from a veteran help.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Almost like a coaching standpoint. Look, this is a guy
Sure.
that's played a ton of third base.
Yeah.
And this is also a guy that has made an offensive adjustment
Mhm.
that Beatty really needs to make. One
Right.
of Beatty's biggest issues last year was he didn't lift the
Ground balls.
ball enough.
Yep.
He still hit the ball hard. He still was taking pretty
Sure.
good at bats, but the
Yep.
biggest issue was him not lifting the ball enough.
Right.
And look, we know that's how Justin Turner turned his career around.
Right.
That's how he broke out, was by lift. I mean, I'm simplifying it
Yes.
for the sake of the show, but
Yep.
it was him lifting the ball more. And that's what they need. The Mets need to make those swing changes with Beatty to get him to.
Sure.
Really, they need to do it with Vientos too, and they need to do it with Mauricio. All three of those guys hit the ball on the ground too much, and I think a voice like Justin Turner in that clubhouse would be terrific. I mean, they've had Eric Chavez and Jeremy Barnes, obviously in weird different roles and stuff, but they've been with the team for 2 years, and we haven't really seen much development from the young players with those guys there. So I think having a guy like Justin Turner certainly would be a plus from that standpoint too.
Yeah, I totally agreed there. And the Mets need thumpers. So the more veteran bats they can bring on, some shorter term deals or whatever, they should do it. We've talked about that at length, and I think next week we'll go a little bit more in depth outside of Turner, some guys we could think. But that's going to wrap up the show for this week. Met fans, keep your heads high. I think there's a good plan in place. There's a long winter still ahead. A lot can happen. Obviously, happy holidays to everybody. And as always, let's go Mets.